So I'm Alex Steffen. I'm the editor of worldchanging.com and of the World Changing book, as mentioned. And what I want to talk with you about tonight is where we are and where we're going. And for those of us who've been working on environmental issues for a long time, I've been an environmental journalist now for over 18 years, this is a pretty exciting time because for the first time, we are really beginning to recognize that we live on a single finite planet and that that planet has extremely finite resources. This is all of the air and all of the water we have or ever will have, really, compared to the size of the planet. And we're beginning to realize that there are some implications of that. And luckily, we're beginning to move beyond some of the old debates about whether or not we have an environmental problem and move into a new debate where there's really only two sides. There are those of us who recognize that there's a massive problem that we need to face immediately with great vigor, and those of us who are just mistaken. So, you know, it's really kind of a nice moment. However, we can't be too happy because when we look at what's actually going on, when we measure our ecological footprint as a species, when we measure the impact we have on the planet's natural systems, we're beginning to recognize that we have overshot the Earth's capacity to sustain us. We are now using more of the Earth than it can regenerate, using more of formerly renewable resources than can be renewed, and we are starting to actively undermine the ability of the Earth to support us. We are already beginning to see the results of our catastrophic collision with ecological reality. I mean, we're beginning to see things like the drowning of New Orleans, the burning of Southern California, droughts in Georgia, dengue fever outbreaks in Texas for the first time. And we're being told by those who are in the best position to know that things are already much worse than we had previously thought. We're starting to hear back from people like the IPCC, which says climate change is here and it's big and we need to deal with it. And as a matter of fact, in the mere months since then, many of the leading scientists involved have said that that was by far too conservative an assessment. We've seen things like the Stern Review, the UK government's official response to climate change, saying climate change left unchecked will be the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression. We have seen people like Jim Hansen, NASA's leading climate scientist, say that we need to get ourselves back to 350 parts per million CO2 equivalent. We are now already at 383 parts per million. And he says failure to do that will lead to truly catastrophic climate change. We're seeing the first signs of collapse in ecosystems all over the world, on every continent and in every ocean. We're seeing species extinctions, dead zones, forests burning, alien invasive species, water scarcity where there used to be none. We're also beginning to understand the impacts of our industrial system and understand that we're pumping into the Earth's air and water all sorts of toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and so on that we never imagined were either present in the concentrations that are there or as horrible in their effects as we're now learning. And, of course, resources themselves are starting to run out. From oil to metal to topsoil to water, we're starting to see more and more and more evidence that we have peaked out our ability to extract resources from the earth, or soon will, and that the result of that is going to be resource wars, conflicts. Without a dramatic change, we're going to see ourselves fighting over the scraps of what we're leaving on the planet. At the same time, there are billions of people now climbing their way out of poverty. And this is actually, I think, one of the brightest points on our planet, is that we are, for the first time, seeing large numbers of people moving out of situations that any of us in this room would find really grim and moving into a much greater level of prosperity and comfort and security and health. And we are not about to talk them out of doing that. The northern standards of prosperity, they've all seen Baywatch, right? They understand how wealthy we are, and they, like us, just as Americans are now emulating people who are much richer than themselves in terms of thinking about what they want and what they need, people in the developing world are now emulating us, right? There's this phenomenon of vertical emulation. And we know that with 3 to 5 billion more people on their way to becoming globally middle class, we can't simply replicate what we've been doing so far. We are already straining the Earth to its limits. Another 3 to 5 billion people living like us in some way will just really, cook our goose. And in fact, we know that if we continue down that path, the consequences are not only predictable, they've been predicted for us, right? And they are essentially a global Somalia. We know that it can get unbelievably grim. But there is another option. And this is what I really want to talk with you about tonight. Because we don't tend to grapple with the full magnitude of the crisis we face. We also don't tend to grapple with the magnitude of the changes we need to make or think about how realistic they are. But we know that there is another route. We know that sustainable development is possible. We know that although right now no one has yet developed a way of life that offers both a high level of human development and a low level of ecological impact, right? What fits in this sustainable development quadrant, what we might think of as a one planet life, that though nobody has developed that yet, it is possible. The only thing that limits our doing that is the limitations of our own thinking. And if we are going to in fact have a one planet way of life, we Americans need to lead the way. We have caused the problem. The largest share of the carbon that's already in the atmosphere heating up the planet was caused by us burning fossil fuel to get rich. We are still the leading drivers of the problem today. When you add our direct impacts and our indirect impacts, we are still the problem. But we need to lead for another reason as well, which is that we're the only ones who can. A huge portion of the world's universities, research institutions, R&D departments, engineers, inventors, designers, architects, etc., live in the US. We are basically the brains to the world. And we need to use that brain power to invent a one planet model of prosperity for ourselves, such that we can reduce our own direct impacts on the world, which, as I said, are huge, but also so that as those billions of people enter the global middle class, they have something to emulate which is other than planetary destruction, right? That they have a method, a path forward that offers them the possibility of prosperity while offering all of us the possibility of sustainability. And we need to do that very, very quickly. Right? If we're going to have 3 to 5 billion people, depending on whose estimates you believe, entering the global middle class by 2030, we need to have the model in place when they do it, which leads to the motto that we've been hearing recently of one planet, 2 decades. It used to be one planet, 3 decades, but we're running out of time. And each of us, of course, has a part to play in making that transition. However, it's probably not the part we're used to playing. And here's, I think, the first place where what we need to do and how we need to think really collides with what we are doing and how we do think today. We are so used to being told that it's our responsibility to save the planet, that our small choices are what's needed from us to respond to the planetary crisis we face, that we have failed by and large to recognize that, in fact, nothing we do as individuals is going to solve this problem. That there's no amount of individual action that can get us to sustainability. In fact, it's almost impossible for the average American to be sustainable. Our share of our public infrastructure and so forth is larger than one planet itself. So even if we change our own actions, we've still not changed the actions which are being done in our name. So there's really no way to shop our way to sustainability or recycle our way to sustainability. And nor is it enough to simply swap out what we're doing now for better things. There's this assumption that what we need to do is step up a little bit more than just recycling and start to buy products which are like the products we use today, but which are much greener. So that, we'll get to sustainability if we just change our Hummer for a Prius, if we just swap our McMansion for a green building, if we, stop going to the Gap and start buying green fashion from Gaiam or something.